that's actually what I want to talk about in this presentation here. So we'll actually, for the most part, skip to the good stuff. So Tristan, what you're probably familiar with is this. It's a slide kind of like this of how we define insights. So insights is a cannabis market projection. And we are still using this within our demographic data. However, demographic data does come from a different point. So we get a couple of things from the point of sale. Most retailers use a CRM platform that is integrated with their point of sale to help manage their customers. Some point of sales do have this built in with their actual platform. So I think Trees has a CRM that's actually built in, as well as Cova. Don't quote me on that, guys. I haven't seen them in about a year. But what we're able what we're able to get from that is a gender. So almost every point of sale, they're not particularly woke. So most point of sales give us male, female, or unknown. And honestly, for the folks who do have this, I've looked through quite a bit of data with retailers as they're exploring their own data on the other side of our tool stack. So on the retailer side, we have some retailer premium add-ons that allow them to analyze their data and then compare it almost identically to the market itself. Most folks have a fairly small bucket of unknowns. It's much smaller than people would expect it to be, usually 1% or less, assuming that they have about 90% of their records tagged. That's just from what I've seen in with working with a handful of retailers there. We also get their year of birth, and we're able to help translate that into a specific generation, which we'll cover when we get in app itself. And then we also get an anonymous customer ID. So what that means is we get, Ashley is shopper 01016, and shopper 01016, we can actually track that person over time. So we can actually see the gender and generation sales over time. And we use that information to also look at things like repeat purchase rates. And we do have some one-time reports that at a brand level. Tristan, I don't think we've explored those with Saw and the rest of your team, but they are pretty popular. And Kurt, if you haven't seen them either, they're outside of the platform themselves, because the biggest thing that we look at here is we need to make sure that we have a statistically significant sample size of data to be able to forecast out to the total market. So for example, when we first launched demographic information in Canada, we almost exclusively launched in one market, and now we do cover Alberta and Ontario. But due to some of the different regulations compared to some of our US markets, in markets like Saskatchewan and some of the others, we just don't have enough data, or it's not legal to collect that data. Fun regulatory hurdles that we jump through. Tristan, does this answer the bulk of your question?
Yeah, so basically the CRM is tracking customers, and when they're entered into the system, you assign a gender to them?
Correct. Actually, the system or the bud tender or the individual usually enters that in. So we're not assigning genders to them. We're actually getting that gender from the point of sale. So the anonymous customer ID is associated with a gender and a year of birth.
Right. Okay. No problem.
We do have an algorithm that helps us guess. So if we just get, in some cases, we get first name only and date of birth. So we do have some algorithms that help us assign first name to a gender. I think for the most part, it sounds like we've moved away from some of that. I haven't heard our analytics team talk about that in a very long time, but we used to do that as our primary source. Now we have all these robust CRMs that we're plugged into, as well as partnerships with folks like Springbig, who can also help us build out some of that data set. We have millions of transactions traced. When we first launched in California, I think we had 6 million. That was demographic data that was launched in, I want to say, 2020. So that base of individual transactions associated with gender and age, year, date of birth and age. Date of birth and first name has grown. Wow, my words are not coming easily this morning, guys. I apologize. And then a lot of people do ask us, right? So we do have, HIPAA, and depending on the market, we do have HIPAA regulations that we have to work through. So we do sign HIPAA privacy policies with our customers, our retail customers, but all of our demographic data is completely anonymous. So you'll never find me, Ashley Wallace, in the system, but you'll find plenty of other customers, like customer number 01016, who and find out, what's going on with the millennial females, which is my gender and generation. This data is a little bit different. So we do have close to real-time data in our demographic data, but there will be points where it just stops at the last complete month. And that is because we are forecasting the data after each month closes. So in July 1st, we'll have June data. And this has changed. I pulled this from one of our older ones, but I want to be on the safe side. I'm pretty sure, guys, you'll have the last complete closed month. So we wouldn't necessarily be able to see May data today, but I will be able to see through all of April. And this will only be on a select number of dashboards where there's a different type of date range dropdown that we'll walk through. That is all I have for slides, guys. I'd really like to make sure we have time to get in app, but do y'all have any questions before we get a little bit deeper? I'll keep an eye on the chat, Kurt, in case you have anything.
It all makes sense on my end so far.
Perfect. All right, guys, I'm going to pause my screen share. We will switch gears. Going to the, we're not going to pause it. We're going to go into the switch app. I'm going to change my company because I want to make sure I have all of the data. Selfish. I have that in my headset internal account. Quick reminder, if you have not explored it before, there's a little bookmark icon in the upper left-hand side of the screen. If you go here, this is where you'll find our industry reports. So if you subscribe to any of our mailing lists, you can get these, and they're available through a marketing web screen on our app, on our website, headset.io. However, we also have all of them here for you in app, and we have done a few demographic pieces. Sometimes I have to come down here and look at more than 10 items per page. And there is this one here from February 1st. So our data team did do a deeper dive into understanding consumer trends and demographics. You're able to download these reports, but this gives you a nice high-level summary. So let's say you're only subscribed to California data, for example. This is where you can start to see, well, how does that split out across different markets? How does the US compare versus Canada? And have all of that work done for you, so you don't have to go in and run your own analysis. However, I do encourage that people take their own explorations in app after reading something like this. It just helps set the tone. So I have read this, and Kristen, for you, this is one of the things that I was thinking you might find interesting, right? Looking at the different male versus female pricing differences, as well as our gender and generations. As you're thinking about like what demographic is marketing hoping to target with this product, are we priced in an area that makes sense for their desired cohort? All right, guys, so I clicked on the triple diamond icon. That's our insights icon here. And I apologize for all of the weird mouse stuff that's happening. It's, again, I'm on an ottoman, so everything's not flowing as smooth as I would like it. We're going to scroll all the way down to the bottom. I'm going to click on this bolded title just because if you ever are curious about what is coming in a section, this is going to be one of your best high-level overviews. And I'm going to use this page to walk us through what are we going to see today. So we'll walk through a couple of these dashboards, some in more detail than others. We'll look at who is buying. This is going to be, think of it as the 1,000-foot view of who is buying by gender and generation in your market or markets that you've selected. And then we can dive into what are they buying. So understanding this a little bit further and breaking this down by category. So not just who's spending in the cannabis space and what are they actually buying, but what is in that basket. And then how do those baskets compare to each other? So if we're thinking about this, which in a particular category, like for example, maybe beverages, who's actually buying beverages and how do different genders and generations buy beverages? So some folks like millennial women like myself are big beverage fans. And some of our baskets will be like beverage only baskets, for example. Then we can get down into a category deep dive. This will be the first place in this section. So this will be category deep dive here. I have a lot of folks ask me things like, well, how does this compare for gummies versus the other segments within that category? So once you get into the category deep dive, you'll be able to start understanding things like, if I'm a millennial female buying beverages, which types of beverages am I most likely to purchase, or am I purchasing more of? Carbonated beverages, we can see the example here that we would see consumed the most or purchased more often by that cohort. And then we can dive very specifically into an individual cohort. So we can pick the female millennials if we want to keep on that path. They are my people. I'm also happy to learn a little bit more about your own tribe of people and who's buying within your own cohorts, guys. So we can kind of get flexible on where we go from there. A lot of the information that I'm going to be going over for you today, guys, I'm going to highlight a couple of these text tiles for you here. And then we also have this little question mark tooltip. So if you're walking along and you want to have some additional resources after our training today, if you click on this, it'll open up the associated help article to the Who is Buying dashboard. My hotel Wi-Fi has prevented me from preloading all of these, guys. Thank you for your patience as I sort through this. So one of the things that I'll call out here is we can multi-select our markets. This is one of the few sections where we don't have a country filter. So what I do recommend doing is keeping in mind that different countries have different regulations. So if you wanted to look at Canada, you can combine Alberta and Ontario or dive into them separately. And we can look at the total US or an individual US market, depending on your subscription here. So all of this information as we get into it will be based on your subscription. I can say, Tristan, for you, you won't have some of these US markets. I know that for sure. And then Kurt, if you have a limited category subscription, some of that will be reflected in the following dashboard. So your data might look different than mine, depending on your subscription. So if you are following along, just keep that in mind. If you've been in any of my previous training sessions, you've seen the slice by filter. You probably know it's one of my favorites. This demographic slice by filter allows me to toggle between gender, generation, or a combo split of the data. So we're going to start just looking at our men versus our women before we slice the data a different way. And the purpose of these dashboards is really to be able to dive into a specific topic based on your slice by filter. And then you can actually come all the way back up to the top and gain a deeper understanding of this dashboard. So you can run this dashboard 3 entirely different ways and learn more each time as you get deeper into the slice by. Quick call out on as we're getting into here, I already mentioned point of sales are not particularly woke. So again, we usually just have that male female binary available to us. And we're getting that gender either directly from the retailer or based on the name algorithms that I mentioned before. And then as we start to slice this into generations, we divide our generations up into, it's now 4 distinct generations. We have sunset, the silent generation. So that would be people at the youngest, my grandmother's age, she's 87 this year. And at the oldest, my other grandfather is pushing in his 90s. They aren't buying a ton of cannabis. They make up less than 1% of total sales across the whole US and Canada. So we've taken that generation out. But so our next oldest generation will be baby boomers born between 1946 and 1964. Then we have our Gen Xers born between 1965 and 1980. My millennial peoples, we were born between 1981 and 1996. And Gen Z is everybody who is born after 1997. That's our cohort that's aging into the market. So you're going to see a lot of rapid growth as we start to dive into those. And I'll just call out, this is actually repeated on almost every one of these dashboards. So as you're walking through yourself, this Let's Set You Up for Success tile is what you'll want to look at. And it has all of those dates that I just listed for you here. All right, so I've actually had some pretty interesting commentary from folks. So there's definitely some qualitative information out there that says that the male-woman split is definitely closer to 50-50. I'll just call out that we are looking at actual transactions, so who's actually completing the purchase. We can see that men make up the majority of purchases within the cannabis market in the US. If we toggle this over to Canada, it looks pretty similar, about a almost a 70-30, between a 70-30 and a 60-40 split from men to women. And I love this here because if you have a multi-market subscription, all of your markets that you're subscribed to will show up for you. So you can actually see what that looks like by generation, even though we haven't sliced by generation yet, we can start to get a feel for it. And we can see that our dark blue bars, I'll scroll over so we can see the legend. It's going to be the percent of customer count. So it tells us the percent of customers that have come from each demographic cohort on Headset's report. This is so that you can get a better feel for what our sample size is. So we do see more men on this side over here in the darker blue, particularly those male millennials, the millennial group, by far one of the darkest groups and our biggest purchasers in the US and Canada. So we can see here even millennial females make up about 19% of the market versus their male counterparts are about 30% of the transaction count. Over time, interesting, when we dive into specific US markets, I'll use California, for example, we actually tend to see females grow. However, here across all of the markets combined, we can see that females have remained pretty static. So the split hasn't changed much over time. If you were to go into some of our mature markets like California or Washington, we do see that the female cohort has grown slightly over time. I'm going to give this a pretty, I don't want to spend, I tend to spend too much time on this dashboard. So I'm going to just try to speed through it. This is one of the pieces that I did want to pull out here, is that women have grown overall in terms of percent of dollars spent towards cannabis. I think it's a really interesting group, Tristan. We're talking about pricing. We can actually see that this happened like through COVID, notably, and especially in March of 2021, we start to really see an uptick in female consumers. I think that this is interesting when we're thinking about pricing because women in general are more accustomed to spending a higher price, like having a higher ticket item compared to their male counterparts. I have some folks who are like, yeah, this is because of the pink tax. But you know, our hair consultations cost more. You know, getting my hair dyed pink and blonde cost almost as much as my car. Granted, I bought a $500 car off of Craigslist. So it kind of speaks to, you know, I'm willing to spend quality when it matters to me. So I'm willing to spend a little bit more to get my hair done than I am on a vehicle that's going to take me from point A to point B, because I still mostly rely on public transportation. All right, guys, I'm going to give us one quick slice here to look at this by generation and then move us forward in our dashboard. So again, thinking about this from a price point lens, but also from a who am I going to make products for lens. Our youngest generation is definitely the most price conscious. But when we're thinking about like what's our addressable consumer base, how many people are out there shopping and what on average do they spend for products, it really, I think about like the Morse and Coors model of good, better, best pricing, right? Like when I was in college, I remember having Keystone Light around. I don't think I've seen Keystone Light in forever. And that was definitely Morse and Coors like low level product, and it was cheap. And then they have kind of their mid-tier product, right? That reaches, you know, my nieces and nephews who are thankfully finally in their early to mid 20s. They are drinking Coors Light. I can buy Coors Light. My stepbrother he's a Bud Light person, but he still drinks in that like mid-tier price point. He's a Gen Xer. And then my stepmom, who's a boomer, also drinks Coors Light, but she's more likely to reach for the occasional Blue Moon as well. So if we think about pricing and we're thinking about these different generations, understanding who's making up the overall market can help lead our decisions when we're making some of those good, better, best pricing decisions. I am going to get into a couple of things. So as a whole, as I mentioned, this smallest generation down here at the bottom, it's the one that is growing the most is Gen Z. So this is going to be our largest growing cohort because they are actually aging into the market. And our millennials have actually seen a slight decline in total percent of customer count. But keep in mind that we're adding in all these Gen Zers at the bottom here. They're coming in hot.
So I have a quick question.
Go for it.
So if it does the percentage of customers, like if a customer buys like 3 times a week, are they counted as 3 separate customers, or are they one customer?
They are one customer if they're associated on that same customer ID. So every time a consumer shops within a specific store, where you would potentially see some overlap or some duplication is, let's say someone like is price shopping from store A, which is on one side of the street, and store B, which is on another side of the street, that individual could have two separate transaction IDs at each of those individual retailer locations, but within those retail stores, they will have the same unique customer ID.
Gotcha. Thanks for clarifying.
You're welcome. It's a good question. There's a university that's doing a deep dive study and trying to understand if people in cannabis are targeting this younger generation in the bottom half. So the bottom half of this generation is, 18 and under, or 21 and under, depending on where you're at and what your state regulations are. So they're deep diving into trying to understand, like, are there brands out there targeting our youngest generations and how they can do differently, and if state regulations need to change to help protect some of our younger citizens. I think that where it's positioning, it had very DARE vibes, but it is a study that they're doing currently. All right, guys, so I'm going to hop us into what are these people buying. So it's great to know who's buying in the market, right? We're seeing more young consumers coming into the market as they're aging in and becoming 18 or 21, depending on if they're buying in medical or legal rec. So that group is growing, and we're seeing some stasis and some decline in number of consumers shopping in the millennial generation. I don't know if y'all fall into this bucket, but my generation is facing a really high housing prices. Some of us are trying to start families. Some of those additional spends are definitely changing. I will say after, at least one of the things we're starting to see in the US is that fewer people are unemployed. And I think that COVID, if you look at that cohort of people who are unemployed during COVID, I know, at least I can speak to my friends, they don't have as much time to go out and buy weed and sit at home and smoke all day, because they've got to go back to work now that COVID's over and they're not getting those stimulus checks. Very US specific there, Tristan. So that would be like, if you're looking in California, you'll start to see some of those US political events and stimulus checks and some of those regulation things impact the data that we're looking at.
Right on.
All right, guys, so and what are they buying? What I like to do here in the category section, this will be limited based on your current subscription. This can be used as a dashboard where you just look at one specific category. However, if you do have access to multiples, I do recommend at least starting your analysis with multiple categories selected, because some of these dashboards are broken out and they're going to be providing context. So let's keep an eye in our generation. I'm not going to limit this by gender and generation yet. We'll do that next. So just keep in mind that there are a million ways, all the combinations that you can think of on this dashboard in terms of filtering are going to give you different types of analyses. So I'm just going to walk you through 2 main examples here. The reason I'm picking multiple categories, though, is in this wallet spend. So how much is each demographic spending on the demographic segment spending towards a specific category? It's a percent of total wallet spend. So if you only click on like 1 or 2 categories, it'll be like, it's 60-40 between these 2 categories. And now I can get a complete picture of what's happening. So we are looking at all of this sliced by generation. However, some of these do add some additional layers of, never mind. I take back what I was saying. I was just reading my own visualizations wrong here. So again, as a reminder, we have the let's set you up for success, and we do have some definitions as we get in here. So I do want to, I'll highlight a couple of these as we get down into it, but we will look at share of wallet and index. So we looked at how many people are coming in from each gender and generation cohort, and what percent of dollars are they putting towards cannabis in general. And now we're diving into, well, how does that break down in terms of individual categories? So as we can see here, let's look at the category sales overall. We're looking at the percent share of wallet towards that each generation spends towards this particular category. And so flower is king, but millennials, we already know, are about about 30%. Female millennials are about 19% of certain markets. I think I was calling out Alberta specifically there. Their male counterparts made about 30. So when we combine them, they're a huge spending power within each group. And this is one of my favorites to look at. So when we look at the share of wallet, imagine if we had $100 and you can go into a store and buy one of something from every category. It's kind of like you could see how people would delegate those dollars. And I think it's really interesting, especially when we look at edibles and vapor pens. So I'm looking at all US markets combined currently, the total US. We can see that as people get younger, they spend less of their dollars towards edibles. And it's a pretty clear little upside down pyramid that we have here. And on the flip side, for vapor pens, as people get younger, they tend to spend more of their share of wallet towards vapor pens. I don't know why. I know everybody, at least in these buckets, have had that terrifying experience with a brownie that they got way higher than they expected to. But apparently we still like to indulge in edibles heavily. And we can break this down into like, well, is this just gummies? We know that gummies is a large share of every edible market. So we can start to break those down. Vapor pens not surprising here. Some categories, let's see, concentrates is another one that, like vapor pens, as folks get younger, they're usually spending a little bit more of their wallet towards concentrates. My personal speculation is that these groups are looking for, how can I get the most THC for my dollar? That's EQ pricing is probably a good way of how they're shopping. That's how I shop.
More hardcore.
Yeah, a little bit more hardcore. They have higher tolerance maybe, or don't know what they're doing and are just getting really high. But they're looking for those like higher concentration products, right? Whereas some of these older generations, we do still seeing playing around in some of these other categories. Pre-rolls fairly popular amongst everybody, though we see our younger generations spend a little bit more towards pre-rolls. When we start to break this down by an index, we are using the index to see if there is a substantial difference between any of these groups. So if we're looking at these generations, if I see something valued over 100, it means that that generation is spending more of their wallet share on that category compared to the other generations here. So it kind of reinforces what we were looking at below. But I can see, our baby boomers here much more likely to take capsules. I bet there's very few Gen Zs going out there. If I was a bud tender, I probably wouldn't make this product or I probably wouldn't even suggest a capsule. And if I'm a capsule manufacturer, right, I'm probably not trying to target that Gen Z. And if I am, I'm going to have to do a little bit of extra legwork because they're not actually consuming them right now. So there's going to be a bigger lift to get to those younger folks there, right? Whereas if I was to position my project towards an older generation, they're also more expensive in general is one of the things I've noticed. I'm definitely going to have a larger audience already engaged with my Gen Xers and my baby boomers.
Makes sense.
Right. It does, yeah. It's like this is the bigger lift, and I don't know what capsule prices look like in Canada off the top of my head, but I'll add some context for in the US. For example, an average capsule basket is about $120. It's one of the largest baskets. It doesn't happen as frequent, but as a college student, right, I might only have a $20 bill to spend. So if that $20, like if capsules are costing $40, I'm just never going to be able to buy those unless I intentionally save up to buy a capsule. But if I can find a 1 gram vapor pen for 20, I can go buy that, or a multi-pack of infused pre-rolls. I can actually go into a store and buy that. I don't have to wait to save up my money to get my cannabis. So
I think the prices
it makes sense to me.
Canada, you can get capsules for like $1 or less a capsule, but I don't know. From what I've seen, $1 Canadian, and that's like
Like
70
a
cents.
yeah, it was like there's a conversion there.
Yeah. So they're pretty affordable in Canada. I think it's just not the preferred way that people want to get high, to be honest.
Yeah,
Like unless you're trying to quit smoking, like you're not really going to be consuming capsules.
exactly. I remember the first time I walked into a store and saw them, and I was like, that's weird. Pharma's gonna have fun with that eventually. Guys, for the sake of time, I am gonna move us forward a little bit. I will just highlight that, you can slice this in, and we could even come in here and like really hone in on a specific cohort. So let's say we are trying to just get into those Gen Zers, we can really start to drill into, how do we get to this largest, or sorry, fastest growing cohort of consumers? It's been one of the number one questions that I've talked to people through demographics. People are really focusing a lot into concentrates for this group, right? So we can see that concentrates are about 10.5% of their current spend. And then vapor pen manufacturers also talking about, how do we get people, how do we target this group? So I'm going to get us in a little bit deeper, and we can start to hone into one individual category. And so I'm going to start talking about, I want to say edibles, but now I want to go into concentrates. I was going to talk about edibles. We'll see how long it takes my screen to load. If anybody has a vote, one of the things that I wanted to start to dive into is either edibles or beverages have been really, really interesting because they're both, at least beverages are growing really, really fast, and understanding who is consuming those. Hint, millennial females really like beverages. We can start to think about like, how do we get to that group?
And that you're saying millennial females you're noticing across markets or in the US specifically?
In the US specifically, I'd say as a whole, though, because our VP of analytics, Liz Connors, is also a millennial female. So she has takes a personal interest in the beverage market. She said that it has been across all of it. And we can actually do something real quick. Let's go into this cohort. And let's do a quick US versus Canada on here. And when I say Canada in this case, I'm only talking about Alberta.
And sorry if you've already touched on this. How do we find the age cutoffs for those generations?
In the let's set you up for success portion on every dashboard. So the help articles will also have this broken out, but there's a generation text on this. This let's set you up for success is on every one of the demographic dashboards.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm really happy for that too, because I have a hard time memorizing this, so I can just cheat and read it to you. All right, so when I'm talking about our millennial women, and I will call out my cache is showing me all markets here, but we are actually just diving into an individual market on this dashboard. So our little check boxes have gone away, and now we get to deep dive into an individual market. So I chose California for this analysis. I'm a little bit more familiar with their beverage market. And I'll say in terms of innovation and flavor profiles, at least compared to Washington State, we're definitely seeing a lot more innovation. We're seeing people come up with better flavor profiles. We're seeing brands like Can, Wonder, Lagunitas, and the CannaCraft line. So they also have a brand called Gem and Jane, are all doing quite a bit in this space. And this usually when I'm talking to folks in Canada about the beverage space, this is kind of where they're looking to really understand and glean insight into how to make more unique beverage products. I'd say Tristan, up there for you if you want to pass this along to whoever's doing whatever category manager is doing beverages for you guys. I am working with a manufacturing partner in Canada who's currently looking at mocktail-esque beverages because it's illegal to have an actual mocktail, but you can still have like a mint and cucumber refresher. Not a mocktail, it's a flavored carbonated beverage. All right, so
it's crazy. There's so many new beverages in Canada. Like the space is getting really crowded.
It is. Well, and it was really, Kurt, you might be more familiar with some of the US markets. So the US markets are fairly saturated, at least in a number of brands. I remember the first time I looked at the beverage space after Beverages launched in Canada, and I was like, how are there so few people here? You know, there were really just like a couple of tea companies that were starting to get into this space. And there are some like legacy tea companies, like Tea Coco comes top of mind in California, and they've expanded into other categories. They're not just a tea only company anymore. But it was very weird to see how few brands were actually existing in the Canadian space as it was starting to launch. So I'm curious to see what ends up happening as that space starts to, you know, once it gets to that level, like people will start to pick beverages based off of flavor and formulation. So I'm curious to see kind of how it shakes out and how where all those brands fall in maybe like a year or two.
In the US, are there limits on the number of milligrams per beverage? Like in Canada, we have a limit of 10 milligrams per beverage. So that kind of really turns a lot of people off. You have to drink a whole can or whatever just to get 10 milligrams.
Yep. So in the US, it's going to vary by state because we don't have any federal legalization. So different states have different regulations around it. California, which is what we're going to be looking at here, has a 100 milligram limit for a beverage. So it could be something that's dosed out. There's this brand called Cannaline, and they make like, it's almost like a cough syrup type beverage that's meant to be mixed into a non-cannabis beverage. So not quite a tincture, it's actually like a THC syrup is kind of how I would think of it. And so that whole package can be up to 100. And then we see brands like Lagunitas. They make a it's a hoppy infused sparkling water is how they advertise it. And those come in, they have multi-packs of those. So they have a couple of different ratioed options and then multi-packs. Most markets do limit it to 100. I don't know of anybody who's down there at that 10. So when we're thinking about like provinces that border Washington, Michigan, and those northern states that allow legalization, I know at least from folks I've talked to up in Canada that they're like shocked when they get down there and they're like, oh no, I can't drink they're not used to not being able to drink the whole beverage. It can be a little dangerous.
True.
Yeah, most states are limited at 100. And there are different regulations even within some states, right? In California, for example, medical products can have higher dosage than non-medical, but because about 75% of total sales go to the rec market, most brands are investing dollars in having a product that's at that higher milligram concentration. They'll instead maybe launch a tincture, which can be up to 1,000 milligrams. Within the California market, and then they don't have to have that 100 milligram limit, but they're still being able to sell to both markets as opposed to just being stuck in that medical only lane.
Right. Yeah, no, 10 milligrams is just so brutally low. Like it's hard to convince people to, buy a beverage. It's costing like $10 Canadian for a beverage and you get 10 milligrams. It's got to change.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges across all markets is really, if you look at like how much, right? So beverage, we're most directly thinking of competing potentially with the traditional alc bev space, right? And if we go back to our Coors Light, Keystone Light, right? Like how much is a 30 rack of Coors Light or like a 12 pack is probably only going to cost you like $20 USDA. But if I was to go in and buy one of those Lagunitas like hoppy sparkling infused sodas at 10 milligrams, it's probably going to cost like $7 or $8 per bottle. So you're not quite like, I think when people are shopping, they're looking at the beverage space in US or Canada saying, wow, this is really expensive. And then for you guys, you do have that like on top of that, it's 10 milligrams. I'd say the EQ price is fairly similar when we're thinking about that transition, like those $6-7 Lagunitas before tax. In USDA would be about the same, and those are 10 milligram bottles that I'm thinking about.
Right.
So when we get into something like the cross category wallet, right? So we're looking at spend across different categories. So if I'm looking at beverage consumers, right? And looking at our millennial females. So I'm honing in here. You can see that about 10.4% of their spend is going to the beverage space within that basket. So it's kind of like the wallet spend that we just looked at, but flipped a little bit differently. So instead of looking at this as gender and generations, we're looking at the baskets here. Tinctures and sublinguals, I do think are interesting because they're not a very big category, but the people who buy them do spend more on them than other places in their basket. Let's see here. I'm just looking if there's anything that particularly stands out to me. So when we're looking at these, we're looking at the category market share versus our slice by consumer spend. So this is total market versus our female millennials. It looks like their baskets look fairly representative of the market, spending slightly less towards vapor pens than the overall market, potentially because we're seeing a lot of Gen Z females in that space, and a slightly higher spend towards, or percent spend towards pre-rolls. Nothing like really glaring compared to the overall market. And when I say glaring, I mean like obviously distinctly different towards the overall market. For sake of time, I'm just going to highlight that most of the time when people are asking me about these, they're like, this is great. What does that look like trended over time? If you keep scrolling, in almost all of these dashboards, we do set them up so that at the top, you're looking at the kind of like the snapshot in time, and then below we'll start to look at that trending over time. So we can see here for female millennials, they're actually starting to spend more towards vapor pens as time has gone on. My poor beverage line is so small that I can't really see it, but they're spending slightly less towards concentrates, less towards flour, more towards pre-rolls and vapor pens in the last closed month. All of these are also available as a download table. So Tristan, for you, if you are trying to like overlay any of this information across like pricing information, you can start to pull these tables out and kind of like build what you need. Or I think for your team in particular with the Vault subscription, there are people on your side who can start to link some tables together on the back end in our shared Snowflake instance. I promised to get us into segments. So I do want to highlight how we can get into segments here, Kurt, especially for you stuck on no audio there. Most people who are looking at this really want to know, like, well, what does that mean for the products that I'm making? So if I'm making, it's great to know like who's buying pre-rolls, but like who's buying infused pre-rolls has been the hot topic, US and Canada. All right, so I'm going to stick in California here, and I am going to flip gears into pre-rolls, just to get us into that infused segment. Tristan, I think for you in Canada, as these are starting to launch, I know I've talked to a few folks about like upcoming launches for infused pre-rolls. Oh
yeah, we're already in the space.
Yeah. I'm curious to see, like if you haven't looked at California's infused pre-roll market, I highly recommend taking a peek at it. It's surpassed the hybrid space, and it's larger than all of the other segments within pre-rolls combined today. So it's a huge space in California. I think given some of the like 10 milligram or lower THC limits on certain other products, that it might start to become a really big, exciting space in Canada for folks who are looking for a heavier hit. All right, so I am slicing our total pre-roll space by gender. So we're looking like, do men or women buy more pre-rolls? And a couple of these, just keep in mind some of the small text here. So in this particular visualization, we're actually just setting the tone for the overall pre-roll space. So year over year, I will say we've seen a 2020 to 2021, we're actually going to start to see a little bit of a slowdown. So you can see that the step up here from 2020 to 2021 was really large, but the overall market has taken a little bit of a slowdown. So this isn't just the female generation. We can see that men didn't grow quite as much as they did during COVID time. So we'll start to get into this fun post-COVID, what's the market going to look like after 2 years of lockdown? It can be, you want to be careful using like 2020, for example, as a benchmark. April of 2020 in California was a particularly slow April, partly due to the fact that everybody went out and panic bought their cannabis the same way that they panic bought toilet paper. All right, so I'm going to get us into some of the deeper places here because I do want to get us into some of this segment information. So what I was talking about before were those Connoisseur Infused pre-rolls, and we can see that men do spend a little bit more towards these. So this is total sales. So total sales, 64.3% of California infused pre-roll sales are being purchased by men versus a 35.7% purchase rate by women. I can say that as a smaller human, these hit too hard and I pretty much never buy them because they just knock me on my butt and that's not really what I'm looking for. We can actually see, like, on the flip side, kind of to what I just said, females more likely to buy a CBD single strain versus some of these other categories when we're just looking at it in context. This particular visualization will also let you, like, let's say we wanted to dive deeper. You could come in here into your filter and come in and add in our Connoisseur Infused pre-roll segment here. And then in this, I think if this is another slice by filter, it doesn't say slice by on it, but the segment and package size, I can then slice this by a different item. So I can start to get into my genders by package size within the Connoisseur Infused space. So now we know 64% of Connoisseur Infused pre-rolls sales are purchased by men. But what package sizes are they buying? It's pretty even across the board, maybe buying a little bit less in those 5 grams than some of the others. Kind of interesting that women are buying a few more of those. It's a fairly small space in California, but it's just another way for you to be able to get into some of this information. I will say it looks like across the board, there isn't one package size that stands out too much, except for what we saw above that 121, so slightly over indexing towards females in that 5-gram package space, a little bit less so to men. But for the most part, everything's really close to 100. I promised you, Tristan, we'd get into some pricing. So discounting isn't leveraged in Canada in the same way that it is in the US. So if you're looking at this for Alberta and Ontario, this side might be a little bit less relevant for you. However, in the US, discounting is a really big strategy from the retailers to be able to get people to purchase. In some markets, a little bit more rampant than others. But people are willing to spend different. So it looks like women, let's see, those 5 grams, men and women are spending about the same on those 5-gram package sizes, but females are spending slightly less. If I go to this side, these light blue dots here are our women. So it looks like across the board, women are more likely to get a discount from their bud tender than their male counterparts. This could partly be due to the likelihood that women are also more likely to subscribe to a loyalty program. So they might be getting more discounts driven by loyalty stuff as well. It might not just be a pretty girl thing. Thankfully for you, Tristan, y'all don't have to worry about this too much, but you can see, like, our women are being slightly more aggressively discounted than their male counterparts.
There's definitely loyalty programs in Canada too. I think it's becoming a bigger thing here.
It is. I'm curious to see if regulations do change to allow discounting strategy at the retail point of sale. And we see things here like when I'm in Washington, right? Like I can go into a store and I have a Munchie Monday and a Wax Wednesday and Topical Tuesday and Tincture Wednesday or Tincture Thursday, and there's literally a special every single day of the week. So on average, I can expect to see like a 10 to 25% discount on any purchase that I go make in Washington.
Like, I know in other stores here, they have like student discounts, seniors discounts, like native status card discounts, like maybe not quite 25%. Usually they're around 10 or 15%.
Yep. Yeah. When I look in the discount averages, it averages out to be about 3.5%. For most discounted market in this state is going to be Michigan. Average discount right now is over 20%. Pretty wild.
Wow, that's crazy. It's like most of their margin, I bet.
Yeah, it's Michigan's so Michigan just launched for adult use not too long ago, like just under a year ago. And they're really seeing as more competition has come into the market, discounting has just gotten a little bit out of hand, and it's really hurting everybody, like on the brand side and the retailer side. Everyone's feeling the burn of that like race to the bottom that's happening there. All right, so we can see that women don't necessarily get discounted quite as often as men do. So we see our 2-gram joints in Canada. I just switched it because I was curious. They're seeing 0.5-gram joints. They're getting a pretty good discount in the Connoisseur and Infused space, barely paying less. Definitely a smaller sample set of data here when we're thinking about Alberta, since the newer product for the market. So we'll start to see some of this normalize out as the products have more time to mature in the market. When we're talking about like the California infused pre-roll space, Tristan, we're talking about like I wish I had a number off the top of my head. I know in the last 2 quarters of last year, the #1 brand within the pre-roll space in California sold about $21 million worth of sales, and that's just one brand over 6 months. So I'm hoping to see that Canada sees some of the same success that we saw here in the US with some of those products.